Hello, government students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 3, Section 1. We're going to talk about the Constitution. And to start with, we're going to talk about some of the things that are stated within the preamble of the Constitution. Preamble is kind of like an introduction statement. It's basically a handful of sentences that kind of sets out the whole purpose of what this document is all about. There are other preambles. There's a preamble for the Declaration of Independence, but it's the preamble for the Constitution that probably is a little more famous. And some of the things that are stated within that are A, the goal of trying to form a more perfect union. And if you remember under the Articles, we definitely were in need of that. To establish justice, again, under the Articles, we didn't have a judicial branch, and we needed to have a place where we could try lawsuits between the different states. Thus, we needed a court. To ensure domestic tranquility. Anytime that we see the word domestic, that means home, and tranquility, that means peace. And part of this was the fact that during the time of the Articles, particularly in 1786, we were on the verge of a civil war, at least in the state of Massachusetts, under Shays' Rebellion. And the goal would be to have peace within our home country. To provide a common defense, this whole idea of being able to support ourselves militarily, we needed to have that. To promote the general welfare, basically promoting the welfare of our country. Not necessarily welfare in terms of like handing out money, but making sure that our nation could continue to grow. And then finally, to ensure the blessings of liberty. This is kind of a catch all, kind of, basically says all the wonderful things about living in a wonderful democracy and what we're hoping that this document's going to protect. So, when we talk about the Constitution, there are 7 articles. And the question is, what do these articles do? They do establish some different things. Article 1 talks about our legislative branch. Article 2 is basically about the executive branch, talking about what the president can and cannot do. Article 3 is about our judiciary branch. Article 4 talks about the relationship between states and the nation or the federal government. And one of the things that we know about this article is that we can talk about this issue of the supremacy clause, the fact that our Constitution makes the government the supreme law of the land, and the fact that the federal government's always going to supersede a state. Article 5 are the constitutions. This would include the Bill of Rights and all the other amendments that we have added over the years. Article 6 talks about public debt, and it talks about the supremacy of the law. It also includes the oath of office, this idea that our elected officials are going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Not only our elected officials, but if an individual decides to serve in the military, they also take this oath. And then finally, Article 7 talks about how we're going to ratify the Constitution, what it's going to take. All right. On the structure of the Constitution, the purpose of the amendments. This is part 3 here. The amendments basically allow the Constitution to remain responsive to the needs of our changing nation. Thus, it is the articles that or the amendments that make this document very flexible. How we interpret the meaning of these amendments might have changed over the years, especially when we talk about amendments like the 14th Amendment. If you remember, there are basically 3 Civil War amendments. There's the 13th, which ended slavery, 14th, which a lot of people remember that it allowed African Americans to have citizenship. And then finally, the 15th Amendment that allowed African Americans to vote, or at least African American males. The 14th Amendment today has a lot to do with due process of law at the state level and whether or not states can make certain laws and whether or not it would be fair. And some of this is in question when we talk about civil rights. And that's kind of where this flexibility comes in as well. All right. So, our 3 branches of government. If you remember Article 1, 2, and 3 of our Constitution, it kind of lays this out. But legislative branch, and this is Article 1, they pass the laws of our land. They're writing laws. Not to say that a president can give some advice or maybe ask for something to be written up. But typically, it's the legislative branch that does this lawmaking. We can talk about the judicial branch and the executive branch. Executive branch carries out the laws that are passed by Congress. In other words, whatever the Congress writes, it's up to the president to carry it out or execute the law. And that leaves our judicial branch with the purpose of interpreting the laws. Sometimes you can write a law and it might take a year or two for it to get to the president's desk. They can sign it, make it a law. It might take a few more years to find out that maybe this law is unjust. It might be in violation of the Constitution, and that would be up to our uh, judicial branch to kind of determine. All right, structure and principles of the Constitution, the big major ones. Individual rights. When we talk about the Bill of Rights, there's a lot of that that's included. You could talk about the separation of powers, this idea that the president has certain duties, the Congress has certain duties, and our um, judiciary has certain duties. That way we can separate them out. Federalism, this division between the national government, the state governments, and your local governments. Checks and balances. This allows for each branch to kind of check up on one another. And that might be in the form of like vetoing maybe certain laws. It could be declaring certain laws unconstitutional. All these are overriding vetoes. If you're talking about the legislative branch, all of that is very important to kind of make these branches a little more even handed when we talk about their power. And finally, this whole notion of limited government, this idea that we don't make our government all powerful. All right. Thank you very much.